He sang about summer holidays, lit up Britain's stages with charm, and defined what it meant to be a gentleman in pop music. But behind the voice and smile, Cliff Richard carried a heartbreak so personal, so deep, it quietly shaped every song he ever sang and every silence he ever held. For over 50 years, Cliff loved one woman. She didn't marry him. In fact, she married his best friend. Later, she married someone else. And in the end, she died in his arms. He never married anyone else. Never had children. Never chased a different love. Instead, he just kept singing through one of the most hidden heartbreaks in British music history. But if you think that was the only pain Cliff endured, you'd be wrong. In 2014, a police raid changed everything. Live TV helicopters circled his house. Viewers across the UK watched as police stormed in. Cliff Richard, Sir Cliff, was under investigation. The BBC had been tipped off. The allegations were dark and shocking. But they were also false. Cliff was never charged. The entire investigation collapsed. But the damage? It was irreversible. He called it the death of trust. He couldn't sleep. He lost weight. He developed shingles. And worst of all, he said his own home no longer felt like his own. It felt contaminated, he admitted. The man who once sold out Wembley Stadium was now afraid to step outside. To understand how a man could rise so high and fall so fast, you have to go back to the beginning. 'Cause Cliff Richard wasn't always Cliff Richard. He was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in King George's Hospital in Lucknow, British India. His father worked for the Indian Railways. The time the world was engulfed in war, and India was boiling with the heat of revolution. In 1946, when riots broke out during Direct Action Day, the Webb family fled. They boarded the SS Ranchi, an old passenger ship that carried them from the warmth of India to the cold grey skies of post-war Britain. They landed in Surrey, trading servants for ration books and comfort for struggle. For young Harry, the change was jarring. But something inside him stirred, a need to make something bigger out of this new, unfamiliar life. And so Harry Webb disappeared. In his place came Cliff Richard. His manager gave him the name Cliff because it sounded strong and British, and Richard in tribute to Little Richard, the bold, rebellious American rock star. Cliff Richard wasn't just a name. It was a transformation. It was permission to dream. In 1958, that dream exploded. Cliff's first single, Move It, wasn't clean or polite like the songs on the radio. It was loud, raw, alive. Cliff was just 18, but he had already cracked something open. For the first time, British teenagers had their own rock star. Cliff mania began. Girls screamed and fainted at his concerts. Security couldn't control the crowds. The hysteria was Elvis level, but it was happening in London, in Manchester, in Leeds. Britain had never seen anything like it. Then came Living Doll. Cliff hated it. He thought it was corny. But when it hit #1 and sold nearly 800,000 copies, he realized something. His voice was bigger than him. Could move people. Could sell records. Could change the industry. Suddenly, Cliff was more than a singer. He was a symbol. And then came Hollywood. In 1959, Cliff starred in Serious Charge, a dark film that tackled heavy subjects like false accusations and moral panic. He was just 19 but already taking bold risks. By 1963, Summer Holiday turned Cliff into a box office phenomenon. When it premiered in Leicester Square, over 3,000 fans showed up. Cliff couldn't even get out of his car. It didn't matter. The film's soundtrack hit #1 before the movie even debuted nationwide. Cliff had crossed into another realm of stardom, one that few British artists had ever reached. That same year, the Beatles arrived. Everyone thought Cliff would fade. But in 1964, right in the middle of Beatlemania, Cliff released 6 top 10 hits. The Beatles only managed 5. Even John Lennon admitted it. Before Cliff Richard and Move It, there was nothing worth listening to in England. And Paul McCartney once said the Beatles only went to Hamburg because Cliff had already locked up the UK. In 1965, a global music poll shocked the industry. Cliff was voted the world's top male singer, ahead of Elvis, Lennon, and McCartney. He had done what no one thought possible. He held his ground while the music world changed around him. But behind the scenes, Cliff was changing too. In 1966, Cliff walked on stage at Earl's Court, not to sing but to stand beside American evangelist Billy Graham and announce that he had become a Christian. It was a bold move. Cliff wasn't just making a personal decision, he was going public with it. In front of thousands. On television. In the middle of the swinging 60s when rock stars were supposed to rebel, Cliff chose faith. The response was swift. Fans cried. Others walked away. Some insiders assumed his career was over. Even Cliff wasn't sure. For a while, he considered leaving music entirely. But instead, he stayed and rewrote the rulebook. He proved you could be a pop star and still be a man of faith. He said, "My confidence grew. My attitude changed. I no longer had to pretend to be someone I wasn't." His music didn't stop. His career didn't stall. Fact, it evolved. He began blending pop with deeper themes, songs with soul and purpose. While other stars chased trends, Cliff found peace in being himself. Till, by the mid-1970s, it looked like Cliff's time had passed. In 1975, for the first time ever, he had no charting singles. Critics declared his career dead. Then, in 1976, Cliff released Devil Woman. Dark, strange, hypnotic. Shot to the top 10 in both the UK and US. Sold over 2 million copies. Suddenly, Cliff was back, and now he was edgy. Rock stars like Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton wore "I'm Nearly Famous" badges in support of his new album. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a reinvention. In 1988, Cliff did the unthinkable. He dropped Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle, faith-filled holiday track. It became the UK's biggest single that year, selling 750,000 copies in 6 weeks. Even in the age of synth-pop and rebellion, Cliff's voice cut through. Then in 1989, Cliff Richard released his 100th single, more than any other British artist in history. Fans chose it. The Best of Me hit number 2 in the charts. By then, he had earned 14 number ones and 65 top 10 hits. No one else came close. And just to make sure no one forgot, Cliff packed Wembley Stadium later that year. It wasn't just a concert, it was a celebration of history. A tribute to every decade he'd survived and thrived through. He performed hits from the 1950s to the 1980s. The show was filmed and turned into a live album and TV special. Cliff had done what no other artist had ever done. He had scored number 1 hits in 5 consecutive decades. But the spotlight could never erase the shadow in his heart. For all the success, Cliff never built a family. The one woman he loved, he lost. And while the world wondered why he never married, Cliff stayed silent. Until finally he said, "I didn't want to get married unless it was forever. And I've only felt that with one person." Then, just when he thought he had weathered all life's storms, 2014 arrived. Police raid. Public shame. The false allegations. The betrayal. Cliff sued the BBC and won. But no lawsuit could return what was taken: his peace, his safety, his name. Even after being cleared, he admitted he never felt the same again. But here's what makes Cliff Richard who he is. He kept going. He still performs. Still sings. Still smiles. Not because he's chasing relevance, but because he believes in something bigger. Cliff Richard didn't survive because of luck. He survived because of grace, love, and faith. He's the boy who crossed oceans, changed his name, built a legacy, and stood alone on stage, decade after decade, never asking for sympathy. He just sang. And maybe that's why, even now with the world forever changing around him, Cliff Richard remains unmarried, undefeated, unshaken.